Welcome to Movie Speeching. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take good care. 2067 is the name of the movie. Please like and subscribe for every update. Shortly, climate change, deforestation, and nuclear war will wreak havoc on the planet, and most cities around the world will gradually collapse. And there is a lack of electricity, food, and a dangerous lack of oxygen. And until 2067, he is one of the few remaining cities in Australia that was able to survive thanks to synthetic oxygen. And however, this oxygen is contaminated and causes human disease. Ethan White and his best friend Jude take on jobs as power suppliers and workers to keep the neutral reactor stable and restore power to the city. And when the shift ends, her boss checks her to make sure everyone is still healthy, and one of her employees won't be able to come the next day, so Ethan takes over his shift to earn extra oxygen credits. But her boss fires the poor guy anyway, and on his way home, Ethan sees demonstrators saying that oxygen is not a privilege, but a sacrifice that must be made for this generation and generations to come. And as passers-by ignore him, Ethan confronts a laid-off worker who is desperate for a job due to his child and illness. And an argument ensued, but was interrupted when a demonstrator suddenly woke up and opened fire. And later, Ethan finds out about this on the news at his house, and the protesters did this to commemorate the death of the last living plant. And the report also notes the rising number of deaths from the disease, and how oxygen manufacturer and conglomerate Chronocorp has promised to find a solution. And however, the people continue to revolt, fearing that humanity will soon perish. And the reporter then starts talking about the dead protagonist, Chronocorp scientist Richard, Ethan's father, so the reporter turns off the TV. And at that moment, Ethan's wife Xandy arrives and gives her a new oxygen mask. And while they were fooling around, Xanda told Ethan that she had an illness that caused her to suddenly vomit blood, but Xanda assured Ethan that she was okay. And at one point and later, Ethan is called to Chronocorp's office and Jude comes in. And they meet with Regina and the company's chief technology officer, who offers to help Ethan save humanity before taking them to the lab. And it turns out that they are working on a time machine called Chronicle, which Richard invented 20 years ago. And they tested it by transmitting a clock for a few minutes, but when they also transmitted radio waves, they got a response from 400 years in the future. Send me Ethan White. And Regina suspects that humans and future humans have discovered a cure for the disease, and that Ethan is the only one who can take advantage of it. And however, the team doesn't know how to get Ethan back, so Ethan must find the person who sent the message to return. And after the meeting, Ethan goes to a bar with Jude and thinks about Regina's request. And Ethan doesn't want to leave Xanda, but Jude points out that staying here means Xanda will die while he leaves, and that he may end up saving her for years to come. And when Jude tries to bring up Richard, Ethan reminds him that his father disappeared, leaving him and his 8-year-old son with nothing but a self-erasing device, a note, and a strange device on his wrist. And Ethan thinks that if Richard had been there, his mother would not have died, and he refuses to do the same to Xanda. But Jude says he doesn't have to save Xanda like Richard and Ethan did. And after Jude leaves, Ethan thinks about his 8th birthday, and he waited all day for his father, but Richard was late, and the gift to his father turned out to be a strange box. And he put little Ethan's hand in that box and said that someday he would have to make an important decision, and suddenly the electronic bracelet closed around his wrist, causing him to bleed. And when the boy cried out in pain, Richard told him the bracelet would not come off and left the house, ignoring his wife's protests. And afterwards, Ethan also has to think about his mother's death, and he decides to go home and tell Xanda about Chronocorp's plans. And he doesn't want to break up with her, but Xanda asks him not to use her as an excuse for not saving her humanity and not having her faith. And she also mentioned all the children in her class who died, whom she said were horrified. And later that night, Ethan goes up to the roof to observe the city and desperately tries to remove the bracelet, remembering the day his mother died on the street. And that day, Jude found him and shared his oxygen mask with him. And in the present, Ethan cries as he makes his decision. And the next morning, Ethan leaves Xanda with a metal flower with the promise that he will return, unaware that Xanda is awake and crying. And when he arrives at Chronocorp's office and makes a deal with Regina, he will not leave unless Xanda administers his first cure. And Regina accepts, and they immediately go to the lab, where scientists show Ethan how to use a special suit and a small pocket computer called Archie. And Jude also shows up to show his support and promises to take care of Xanther. And once ready, Ethan climbs into the machine, and electricity surrounds his body until the machine fires a blast of energy, sending Ethan into the future. And a hole opens in the sky and Ethan falls at great speed, landing in the middle of the rainforest and instantly losing consciousness. And when Ethan wakes up, he realizes his suit is on fire, quickly takes it off, and crawls out of it just before it explodes. And Ethan's body then has to take some time to adapt to the sunlight and clean oxygen that has allowed plants throughout the area to grow again. And after admiring nature for a while, Ethan uses Archie to locate himself, but Archie is unable to connect to the satellite. He eventually releases a magnet into the ground, allowing Archie to detect nearby structures and direct Archie to the nearest facility. And Ethan is surprised to find a skeleton with a hole in the skull at the entrance, but his real shock comes when he sees the skeleton wearing a suit with his name on it. And he also finds Archie resting under the leaves, a skeleton, and Richard's bracelet on his wrist, which had a green light on it. And this means he died during this mission, which causes him to panic. And after calming down, he tried to open the door to the facility, but to no avail. And instead, he asks Rusty Archie to play his last recording. And the machine plays a distorted voice saying, "It's better, then no one will suffer anymore," followed by 2 arguing voices and a gunshot. And then at that moment, the battery dies and Rusty Archie shuts down. And later, noticing a wire wrapped around a Rusty Archie, Ethan grabs the wire from his suit and wraps it around his own Archie, finally allowing her to detect the beacon signal. And Ethan follows the signal through the woods and finds 2 oxygen bottles and a dispenser, but not a single person. And later that night, Ethan builds a fire with Archie's help, but it takes a while. And he also finds some berries that Archie can't identify, so Ethan eats them but drops them because they taste bad. And Ethan then asks Archie to look at the constellations and see that it is his year 2474. And it reminds me of when I looked at the stars with him and Richard. And however, that memory ends abruptly when a thunderstorm hits the area and Richard begins to feel unwell, vomiting and hallucinating. And Ethan witnesses a ball of light hitting him near the camp, and as his hallucinations worsen, he realizes a man is running towards him and stabbing him in the chest. And Ethan faints and then wakes up to find that the mysterious man is Jude, who has injected him with a drug that Ethan extracted from a berry to cure the poison. And the next morning, Jude explains that Chronocorp had been tracking Ethan and his vitals and noticed that he was dying, so they used Chronicle's remaining powers to call Jude for help. And Ethan shows Jude the skeleton, but Jude thinks it's not Ethan's fault. And he then uses Archie to continue tracking the signal, eventually finding another device that scans Ethan's eyes and immediately opens the door. And it's very dark inside, but a screen with Ethan's name on it lights up, and pressing enter activates the bracelet on his wrist, which collects blood and his DNA for analysis. And Jude believes he is being attacked and reveals he brought a gun. And suddenly, the light on the bracelet turns green and the computer turns on the light after confirming Ethan's identity. And the two are shocked to find themselves in Chronocorp's laboratory, and the computer tells them that the portal will open in 4 hours. And Jude is relieved, but Ethan is worried because the bracelet is the same green as her skeleton. Ethan then checks the computer and logs and finds a holographic recording of Richard and his time working for Chronocorp. And Richard explained that he had buried a monitoring station that would transmit data from a future where the air was breathable. And in the next entry, the team prepared to receive a response from his 2474, but all they received were the words, "Please send Ethan White." And Regina asked if she could send the materials now, but her report indicated that there was a problem with the power supply in 2474. And suddenly, the lab systems shut down and a computer alerts Ethan to a nuclear energy problem. And Ethan has Archie run diagnostics and discovers that the power supply is damaged and they cannot return to 2067. And the computer also warns that if the problem is not resolved before the countdown ends, a nuclear explosion will occur. And Jude rushes in to find the tools, but Ethan is stuck on what they mean and what he has learned. And Chronocorp knew about the power outage because he had received the message long before he called. And then that message was from a set from here. And that means they fixed this place and found a cure. And he wonders why Chronocorp didn't tell them about the power outage and sent Jude instead of the medic. But Jude simply says that he was the only one who volunteered. And Jude then insists that they should work on the repairs. But Ethan wants to analyze their situation first, which makes Jude almost become aggressive. And when Ethan backs away, Jude asks him to calm down and understand how serious the situation is. And so Ethan agrees to go and repair the entrance and tunnel as long as they look for the sender of the message. And the two head through the forest to the town, but find it covered in ruins and vegetation. And as they explore the area, they find many skeletons, but Ethan notices that not a single human skeleton survived from the years they came. And Earth just waited for people to die and then recover. And worried, they go to Zante's school and find the skeletal bodies of the students, meaning they died in the classroom. And without someone to move the body, Ethan can't help but think that both the body and the mission will fail. And then he found another skeleton. It belongs to Zante, and the metal flower is in her hand. And with grief filling his heart, Ethan remembers the night Richard called to meet him somewhere, but a stranger followed her, killed his mother, and stole Ethan's oxygen mask. And Richard doesn't show up, but Jude finds and saves Ethan. And the memory causes Ethan to have a panic attack, but Jude helps calm him down. and Ethan cries and regrets it, but still he leaves Xander alone, thinking that they can't do it and can't change anything. And however, Jude says that they are better off because no one is suffering anymore, which shocks Ethan as it was a word he heard from Rusty Archie. And to confirm it, Ethan plays the recording again, notices it, and the altercation ends with Jude shooting him. And just then, Jude pulls out a gun and Ethan demands to know why he has a gun when he has nothing to fight for here. And the argument continues until Archie reminds them that there are only 2 hours left before the nuclear explosion. And Jude drags Ethan into the tunnel and they realize that the core is on fire and they need to reroute the power. And any attempt to do this will immediately fail and the computer will attempt to close the door for security reasons. And Jude manages to block it with a metal rod, but Ethan, hearing the computer say the room needs to be depressurized, removes the rod and leaves Jude outside to rescue him. And Ethan then activates the oxygen purge and power is restored, but he passes out. And when a desperate Jew breaks the glass, oxygen returns inside and Ethan survives. And they then return to the lab and learn that he has only 37 minutes to activate the portal. And suddenly, Ethan opens the door, discovers it is connected to his skeleton, and accepts that his fate cannot be changed. And Ethan accuses Jude of trying to shoot him while they are changing Archie's battery. And Ethan then has a Rusty Archie play the last thing he saw, and the recording shows Jude threatening Ethan with a gun and telling him to fight back. And Jude swears he won't shoot Ethan, and he offers to stay and gets into an argument with Jude, but Ethan refuses and leaves everyone dead. And Ethan then forces open another door to find the utility room, but the mask is not there. And Jude insists that he can't save everyone, but Ethan pushes him away and heads to his computer to play the log from his 8th birthday. Richard says he made a mistake, but the message is interrupted when Jude turns off the power. And an angry Ethan then locks Jude in the utility room and turns the power back on to stop the viewing in news. And Richard wanted to tell his son that he had done everything for him, so he called home and asked little Ethan to go for a walk with him, and his mother asked him to meet her son. And I asked, but before he leaves, Regina and Jude enter the lab to corner him. And it turns out that Regina wanted to use the Chronicle to escape to the future with a select group of elites, abandoning her search for a cure and claiming that the virus was actually human. And Richard then refuses to cooperate and confesses that he programmed the system so that only Ethan can activate it in the future. So an angry Regina pulls out a gun and asks one of the scientists if that is possible, or at least one of them, and sent to solve the power problem. And once scientists confirmed this was possible and feasible, Regina shot Richard. And at that moment, Jude breaks free and tries in vain to stop the recording, but the rest of the truth is revealed. She tells Regina that she sends a team to kill Ethan's mother and asks Jude to take Ethan's guardianship, and I ordered it to become. And devastated, Ethan lunges at Jude, accusing him of taking advantage of him over the years, and they begin another argument over what to do next. And Ethan tries to stop Chronicle by pulling on the cable, but Jude attacks Ethan and pins him against the wall, begging him to fight. And when Ethan refuses, Jude pulls out a gun and aims it at Ethan's head, but Ethan doesn't fight back and says he believes in him and his brother. And when he sees Ethan in pain, he remembers Jude and the night they met and is overcome with guilt. And there he apologizes to Ethan, then removes himself, and in the present, Regina prepares the elite group to escape and orders her guards to kill Ethan as soon as they arrive in the future. And she goes back to Ethan, and Ethan gets sick and grabs Jude's hand, but rips it off again when the computer responds to his ping sent by Regina's team. And through this, he eventually realizes that he is the person in the lab who did all this, and writes a message with his plan in mind: send Ethan White. And in the present, Regina is waiting for the countdown to reach 0, but the Chronicle opens and closes instead of the portal. And inside the machine, they find a gift from Ethan consisting of a bouquet of plants, canned goods, and a video of Richard's murder. And in the future, Ethan destroys the Chronicle so that no one can use it again. And soon, breaking news shows report on Regina's arrest and how scientists are working with plants to begin regenerating the ecosystem. And a Chronic Cop employee brings Zante her can because it has her name on it, but when she opens her can, she sees real flowers and cries. And in the future, Ethan buried Jude and his body by the river, leaving a metal flower on the grave. Suddenly, Ethan sees a butterfly nearby and remembers what his father taught him, that everything in the universe is connected and time passes, so he rushes back to the facility and discovers that his skeleton is gone. And Masu. And Ethan is excited about the possible changes, and he runs through the forest to reach the city again. And this time, he discovers that humanity has survived and developed buildings that blend safely with nature. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.